All right. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Yeah.
Perfect. Good. Then let's get started. We're pretty excited. And as you can see from the title, what we are going to do today is talk a bit about smarter and faster Angular development. And we will specifically look into how you can do that with our own dev tool, which is like Novels NX. So before jumping in, let's quickly present ourselves. I'll let go Isaac first.
Yeah, I'm Isaac Mann. I'm an architect at Narwhal. I work on the docs at nx.dev. And yeah, I'm excited to be sharing with you.
Cool, yeah, and I'm Yuri Strumflohner. I'm from Italy, also an architect at Narwhal and core member of the NX team. So what are we going to talk about today? Now, these are more or less the topics which we would like to go through. And so the first one is about driving good architecture and obviously how NX can help you there, like what are the main problems you might face. Also, we're going to talk about modern tools and how NX improves developer experience in general. And towards the end, we'd also like to go a bit into the scalability and speed thing, because obviously NX is kind of designed for monorepos and especially shines when it comes to larger monorepos. And then we will have some cool live demos in between, which Isaac will do. And you should definitely stick around because in the end, we will have first of all, the Q&A, but we'll also have some giveaway for you. And so you should be with us till the end and get that giveaway, which is, I think is going to be pretty great. Cool. So let's go to the first topic, driving good architecture. Now, obviously, I'm pretty conscious that this is kind of a subjective topic, right? First of all, what does good mean? And then architecture in general is obviously a big term. You can go from deployment architecture, how much or how easy can you scale your application, or how modular is your application, how well is it composed and can be decomposed in different parts. What I personally see a lot with consulting with people and also when talking to people in the community is that often it's also about folder organization. So with folder organization, obviously there comes also how you organize features, because those two parts are often kind of connected between each other. So let's talk a bit about folder organization in terms of the architecture. And in fact, if you go to the style guide, the Angular style guide, there is a principle called lift principle. And what it says is simply, if you see a component on the page and then you dive into the source code, you should be able to really quickly identify where that specific component or service or whatever you're looking for is located, right? So it should be easy to locate. Also, if you take a look at the file extensions and stuff, you should know what each file contains, so that you don't have to kind of search around, especially if the whole underlying repository source code is kind of unknown to you. Also, in terms of the structure or folder structure in general, they suggest you to start as flat as possible. And then as you need more structure, you actually start nesting things. And so especially when we talk about that folder structure and flat folder structure, there's another style that comes here into play, which you might have heard about, which is folders by feature, right? And so some people that maybe have already been around in the AngularJS days, at the very beginning, what you did is not folders by feature, but rather suggestion there was structure them according to the file type, right? You had controllers folders and model folders and view folders and so on. And now obviously, as the application got more complex and more difficult, what you had is basically that your features were kind of dispersed and distributed across those three kind of folders, which was really hard to track down what features your application has been composed of, as well as it violated that lift principle because it was really hard to locate some code in there. And so what might that folder by feature look like, which is kind of now the suggested way of doing things, even not just in Angular, but in general in all modern frameworks. And so this is just a screenshot of one potential structure of an Angular application. And what you see here is you usually have those kind of infrastructure folders, such as core, messages, store, dashboard, maybe even which is not necessarily feature specific, but kind of is your platform, right? Where you build your features on top of. And then you have the actual features located. In this example, it's even nested under a features folder, so you can nicely locate where things live within your workspace. This here is another example also here, like you see that admin folder, which is basically even grouping subsection of your application, right? You might have like a public facing part and like an internal part, which is more for administration purposes. And so there's even this nesting in there. And then again, you see those feature folders and the code located within those feature folders. Now, what might be potential issues with this structuring? And I would actually like to walk through 3 of them now to kind of give you an idea of what might be problems and how you can solve them with the next. The first one is like feature boundaries. So for instance, if we again take a look and zoom in a bit on that example, which we just had, is if you look in the courses folder here, you see like there are components, there are containers, guards, further down there in services. And what you see here, without knowing the actual structure underneath, is it's kind of hard to know what should be exported and what is like private and internal to that specific feature. So if I'm going to look into that specific feature here and I see like the course item there, it might be an interesting component which I might need in my own feature, right, which is outside that courses feature. And so it's kind of hard to know, am I allowed to use it? Maybe people just even grab it. And so over time, what you have like is that you get into kind of a messy structure. And so this is what you usually have like with an Angular standard setup. So you have that application and the folders are basically your boundary if you want for the different kind of features, right? So you could say it's kind of a monolithic structure here. Now with the next, things are a bit different. Like the best practices in NX suggest you to have like apps and libs. And you can see here in this picture, we have the very same structure of an application which we had before, but it's kind of decomposed into different parts, right? At the very top, you see that thin application layer, and then below you see like the extracted libraries. And the important part here, especially for newcomers, is often like to think about how those libraries work, right? So I call them here workspace libraries because they don't necessarily are libraries as you might think at first, like libraries supposed to be published on NPM, but they are just libraries as kind of a structure, right? You can most often even take like the structure of your folders one and extract them into libraries and then reference them via TypeScript. And so you have like the applications at the very bottom or at the very top and the libraries here at the bottom. And as you can see here, our suggestion is to push as much as possible down into the libraries part, because like the application at the very top should actually just have the minimum possible and the minimum necessary code to actually have your application bundled together. So the application can be seen more as your bundling mechanism, your deployable, which you actually push up to some server where you deploy to some server. And in fact, you could even go a step further here and split them up, right? So your application might be even structured into like a public facing part where people like watch your courses and like access to courses. And then you have that administration part again, which is more kind of for administering like the sales and generating new coupons and stuff like that. And so obviously this might even impact now your scalability, right? Because like the public facing part might need much more scaling, while the administrative part where there are just like a couple of people actually accessing the app might not need all that scaling, right? And so you can see how easy it is already to kind of decompose applications. So in the next, library structure looks more or less like the screenshot which I have here on the left side. So you see here there's a specific libs folder, and then we have a couple of different libraries. And here specifically, I have expanded the store courses library. And within that lib folder, like in the source lib folder there, you see again like the components, containers, and services, just as you would have within the same folder inside your Angular CLI application. The difference here already is that you have also that index.ts file. Now that's actually where you explicitly specify what you want to export. And so if we dive into that index.ts file, you can see here it exports, for instance, like the store courses module folder, because like that's usually what you need in Angular in order to be able to compose parts. But you can also, for instance, define which services you want to export, like which services should be available to our features, which might be useful for them. And so you have to explicitly think about that and specify them here. On the other side, when you want to then use them, you can import them with this nice TypeScript syntax there. So you don't have to use like relative paths, but NX already maps them out to nice like TypeScript path mappings. And so basically the add course platform would be the name of your workspace, and then the folder structure follows after that. And in fact, like there are even linting rules that prevent you from doing relative import. So the code is kind of nice and cleanly structured. So in general, as we have seen, like libraries represent much stronger boundaries already, right? It's like you have to think about that. What do I want to export, and what like should remain within my actual library, right? It's much stronger relationship than just having folders. Another part is restricting access. Like just as we talked before, when you look at those folders, what prevents someone from just like looking into it, taking a look at that course item, maybe slightly even adjusting it and then reusing it within their own feature, which might be perfectly fine because like that might be a component which they might have to use and they might want to use. But those like accidental imports or people actually just grabbing into our features results in really like messy relationships and makes it really hard to decompose applications later on. If, for instance, you would like to like export the courses as a generic library within your organization. And so for that, NX has another mechanism, which is so-called tagging. And so what you can do here, for instance, you see that type :app. So this is just like a tag which you can associate to like your application or libraries within your workspace. Now the colon or the structuring is just like some I've chosen for better clarity. Like you can really take or use whatever string you would like to use. And so let's walk through some very simple example. For instance, here, taking our workspace here, I'm tagging the applications as type app, then like these ones here as type feature, because like they encompass and have like a more elaborate feature within them. And the bottom ones like are more like utility libraries, like infrastructural libraries, if you want. Like they might handle authentication code or even like just have some utility functions. And then you can even go a step further and like define other tags, for instance, like the scope. Here, for instance, I'm saying like this is type scope store. This is scope admin. And this is like how I'm separating my workspace and like defining very perfectly defined like responsibilities of each of those libraries. And the reason I'm doing that is because like afterwards, I can actually go and define rules. And what might rules look like? For instance, I can say like a type application, so the label I defined just before, can only depend on other libraries or applications that have been tagged like type feature or type util. And so in that way, I'm kind of preventing that someone like from the public application directly reference something in the admin application, because like I don't want to have that. Like the apps within them shouldn't be able to reference each other. Another thing could also be like type util can only depend on type util. The reason is like these are just utility functions, and so nothing like in the shared utility library should actually reference a feature library. It should actually be vice versa, like feature libraries should grab into the utility libraries to use them. And similarly, I can also kind of define the scope dependent rules. For instance, I can say the whole public facing part of the libraries and applications should not reference a part within the administration part. And the reason is because like they might have been constructed in a different way. It might even be legit to actually reference such a library, but the point here is that you get an actual error. Even if you implement that in CI, you will have a blocking build. You can then look at it and say like, should I be able to look or reference that library, which is just used within the administration part of the whole ecosystem? And so at that point, you can either like extract the common functionality in another utility feature or in a feature in general, or even just not reference it and find another way around it. So the point here is actually just like making people aware and blocking people, especially if the workspace gets bigger and bigger over time. And the last part here is obviously feature reusability. And we have already kind of seen this when we split up our single application as it was before in Angular CLI workspace into two different ones. It was super easy actually to do that because like we have already the libraries in place. So the only thing we have to do is just wire them up to actually redeploy them in a different manner. So that gives a lot of reusability. And in general, even though like today we're mostly focused on the Angular part, there's no limit to just like limit this to Angular. You can even have a React application or backend applications like Nest.js or just a plain Node app and reference the same libraries as well and even share them, which can be quite powerful, even if, especially like, for instance, if you can share things across contracts like between backend and front-end applications, might be super useful. Another point is modern developer tools. And so that's actually one of the main points we try to do with NX. We try to provide the best DX we can. And so here, just to begin with, this is an architectural overview of how the NX ecosystem looks like. Obviously very simplified, but like in general, like below there is the Angular dev kit, which provides the whole infrastructure for running automations and schematics, as you know them from the Angular CLI. On top of that, there's the Angular CLI and Narwhal Tau, which is kind of an equivalent CLI, which does different jobs or additional jobs to the Angular CLI. And then there's the Narwhal Workspace, which has the whole part about figuring out the dependencies between your applications, imposing linting rules, and things like that. And then on top of that platform, we have a set of core plugins. So there are some core plugins such as like Jest and Cypress or Bazel or Next.js, like which we support out of our core package. And very recently, we have also opened up to the community, like we created the necessary infrastructure for the community to provide their own plugins. This has been a super cool initiative because like we have seen lots of cool plugins coming along, like even Vue support or support for React Native, or even just like, since we are talking about structuring your application, there have been some schematic plugins which help you structure your NX workspace according to domain-driven design principles, for instance. So really cool things going on there. Workspace schematics is also something I personally am very excited about, which is basically a way to generate custom schematics within your workspace. So NX in general comes already, of course, sitting on top of the Angular CLI. It comes already with kind of some schematics for code generation, for components, services, and all the things you already love about the Angular CLI, plus some additional things which we have created specifically, right? Just for instance, like Storybook support or running Jest tests or prettier integration and things like that. Workspace schematics are something where you can actually even level up that game a level further. Because like you can actually generate a workspace schematic which just lives within your NX workspace. And so the main like use case for that is, for instance, if you generate a plain normal Angular library, but within your organization, you want to have like the README customized or how you are actually going to tag that library. And so you can actually create kind of a wrapper workspace schematic, which invokes the Angular schematic, but then adjusts like the files that have been generated even further. And so obviously that helps it like to optimize it for your business, for your application developers, increase obviously developer velocity because like they have already like pre-configured schematics, which you can just like one and it will already comply to the overall guidelines which you might have within your organization. When we talk about automated testing and quality control, what we have in NX by default is Jest support. You obviously also support Karma, just as the Angular CLI does, so you can actually choose when you generate a new application. But by default, we use Jest because we think it's faster and the dev experience in general is better. And the similar thing holds also for the end-to-end testing. Like we have protractor support, but by default, we generate Cypress tests for all your apps. In fact, that's what also you see when you generate a new application. By default, you will get like a Cypress end-to-end test, which lives along your app, which is already pre-configured with the TypeScript setup and everything to just like go ahead and write your tests. And finally, one really cool thing I personally find is how different tools are even combined, right? So you can actually generate a library in NX, add Storybook configuration support for it, and then even like add an additional schematic which generates Cypress tests for those stories. And so you can like combine these different like building blocks into very, very powerful tools. But like Isaac is going to show you more about that, which is probably more interesting if you see the code like running behind the scenes. And then there's also linting and code formatting. So on that front, basically we already pre-generate like printer setup, so you don't have to worry about like the actual formatting of the code, which is not something you should worry about, but it is still important, obviously, because you want to have a consistent formatting across your entire organizational team. And the same story kind of holds for linting. There is TS-lint right now, which comes with Angular CLI, which is kind of deprecated at the moment. And so people are working on ES-lint. And actually, we just released 10.3 yesterday, which has ES-lint support. And so now if you start NX and you basically generate a new workspace, you get actually asked whether you want to use TS-lint or ES-lint. And over the coming weeks, we will actually improve the actual support on ES-lint as well. Let me reload that. All right. picture is here missing. But anyhow, like if you go to this URL here, we have actually just released a blog post a couple of hours ago, which talks about modern Angular and basically how those tools work together, which I've kind of explained to you right now. All right, but I guess I'll hand it over to Isaac, which will actually dive a bit more into the actual code that runs, which is more interesting.
All right. Well, I thought that was very interesting. But let's dig into some code here. So I have here, move this out of the way. Okay. To get started with NX, you can just run npx create NX workspace. And I've already done that here, so you don't have to watch the npm install run. You can give it a preset of Angular, which will create a default Angular application, and then you can give it a name, and I gave it Enterprise NG. So if you run that, you'll get a workspace like this one. And so you have an apps folder and a libs folder for all your libraries, and a bunch of configuration files. So here, your app folder, your default generated app folder is the name that you picked. Also, the folder is the same as the name you picked. And you can run, I'm going to actually do it using the NX console here. So if you open up NX console, which is an extension that you can install, if you search for NX console, it should show up here. And then you get this sidebar here. So if you go to Enterprise NG, which is our default application, I can serve it. So that's the same thing as typing ng serve in your terminal. So we're going to run that, and this is the default application that gets generated for you. It has some instructions in there. So what I'm going to do is, let's pretend that we have made some changes in this workspace. So I'm going to check out another branch here where I have created a new component called the NX slider. And this component, here I'm using it here, so I've gotten rid of the boilerplate HTML here in the app component and included our new component on the screen. It has one input on this component, the NX amount here. And the HTML here is just showing an image along with a range input, and then displaying a message based on that input value. So let me show you what that looks like. So here it is. So we've got this slider here with the NX logo, and the more NX you add to your application, the more you get smarter and faster Angular development. So if we move this all the way down to 0, barely anything is showing. If you move it all the way up to 100, it'll show the whole message. So that's what our component does. So let's, we're going to work through taking this existing application. I'll kill the serve here. And we're going to take this and say, we probably want to take this component, and it doesn't really belong in the app itself. This should probably be in a shared library. So I'm going to run the generate schematic to create a shared library. So we'll call our library shared UI. And as I type it in, it does a dry run of the schematic, shows you what files will be created, what files will be updated. And if this looks right, we'll click run up here. And that will actually create the files. We'll use Sass, that's fine. And now I can go back to my Explorer here and see that the shared UI library has been created. Now I want to run the dependency graph that lets us see what NX sees when it analyzes our workspace. So I typed NX dep graph here to launch the dependency graph. And it pulled up a browser window here. And I'm going to select all to show everything, every project in my workspace. And you can see here that we've got an end-to-end application that depends on our normal application here. And then we have our shared UI library. But there's no connection between the application and the library because we haven't actually made a real connection there. So you see that NX is smart enough to see that where the actual connections are in your code. And it draws these lines based on what import statements you have actually written with your code, which is really powerful. So it's not manually created and instantly out of date. It's actually live and calculated based on what code you have written. So let's take this component here and let's move it down into our shared UI library. So I'm going to right click here in the library, and I'm going to choose NX generate UI. So this right click option here in the context menu, that's a new feature in the NX console version 14. And what it's going to do is it's going to automatically, so I can type the schematic that I want. I want the Angular component schematic. And this pre-populated the project here and the path down there. So just by right clicking there, I told NX console where I want this component to be generated. So I'm going to name it the same as I named this one up here, NX slider, and and I want to make sure to set the style to SCSS, and I want to export this so it can be used outside of this module. Okay, so I'm going to run this. So this component, this schematic generated a blank component here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this whole folder over the top of that one and just replace the blank component with my newly created one, with the one with actual content here. So there's an error here because I need my forms module to get that ng module working. So I'm going to import forms module. So as you move things around, you have to update your dependencies. And then, so that should, if I restart the Angular language server, that makes that error go away. And then here, we're going to get an error on this one. Actually, we're going to get an error here because we've moved that file. So we need to get rid of that since it's no longer there. And we don't need the forms module anymore, but we do need, every time you create a new library, it updates the, where is it? The tsconfig base file, and it adds a path here. But when it does that, TypeScript doesn't automatically pick that up for you. So you have to do, well, I'll show you. If I go in here and I import from, okay, well, it did pick it up. Okay. Sometimes you have to do restart TypeScript server when you add a new library, when you update that pass value. But in this case, TypeScript was on top of things and was able to find it. So we import the shared UI module, import it there, and that should update here. So this should now work. All right, now let me save everything. And I'm going to rerun the serve here. Serve. Actually, while I'm here, why don't I want to show you the dependency graph. Now that I've actually made the connection, you can see that now the line is actually drawn between the application and the library. So you can see that NX was able to tell that because we have this import statement here, we can see that the application, Enterprise NG application, is now really depending on the shared UI library because it can tell that we imported something from that library here. Okay. And the other thing that's great about this is now that we have this component separated into a separate library, we can see that in this index.ts, we have explicitly defined what people are allowed to import from this library. If I were to, let's see, I'm going to put something in here, export const some value. If I were to put that in here, and then I'm going to copy this relative path, and then in here do import from some value here. So there's an error here. It says libraries cannot be imported by relative or absolute path. Let me get rid of that .ts. Okay, so that makes that part valid, but it still doesn't like the fact that you're trying to skip past the skipping past the API that's defined. Even if I replaced it with this path here and then tried to do it direct, a direct import, would be to write there. So that should be a valid import, but shared UI. Okay, well, so because NX is watching out for us, we can see that it throws a lint error when we try to import things that we're not supposed to import. Okay, so let's see what this actually looks like. Let's make sure that our application is still working. Okay, so this is the application itself. So we've refactored and we've verified that our application still works the way we expect it to. Great. So now let's say we have a whole bunch of these components here, and we want to kind of verify that they're working in isolation. Because if they're sprinkled all throughout your application, sometimes you accidentally depend on like CSS rules that are declared in other places. And so it's good to check and see if your reusable components are actually really reusable and not just depending on the specific place they happen to be used right now. So one great way of doing that, testing things in isolation, is to use a tool called Storybook. So the way you would do this is you would add a yarn add narwhal storybook. I've already done this, so I'm going to skip that. But once you've added Storybook, you can do generate narwhal Angular storybook configuration. And I'm going to just give it the shared UI project name, and then check all these checkboxes. And then let me show you what this does for you. So what this has done, it's installing some packages in the background here, but while it's doing that, I'm going to show you that it's added a .storybook file, a folder to your shared UI library, which has a bunch of configuration files for Storybook. It's also looked inside of this library and found all the components declared in this top level module. And it found the NX slider component here and created an NX slider component stories file. Now what this does is it looks in the component itself. It generates a kind of a default Storybook story. And it noticed that there's an NX amount input on this component. And so because of that, it created a Storybook knob for you automatically. And what a Storybook knob is it's basically a there's a form underneath your Storybook instance that you can change the fields on those, and that changes the values of the inputs that for the for the component that's displayed above. Let me, now that this is finished installing, I'm going to show you exactly what that looks like. So under your projects in the NX console here, so this has not been updated since we've added the shared UI library. So just click the refresh button over here and it repopulates that. And now there's a storybook builder here for the shared UI library. So I'm going to click run here. And this will launch a storybook instance for us to look at our slider component in isolation from the rest of your application. So the application looks like this. It's got a title, and then the slider component is all of this part down here at the bottom. Okay, so Storybook is loaded. This is what Storybook looks like by itself. So now we just have the NX slider component here. And you can see down here, we can change the NX amount here. So if it's 10, it updates up here to change where the slider is. And if you make it 100 down here, then the slider moves all the way over the top, over the end. And so we can verify that this component actually works the way we want it to. This is great when you're initially developing the component, but you don't want to do this every single time you make any change anywhere in your application. We want to automate this a little bit. So the other thing that same exact configuration schematic did for us is it created this shared UI E2E application. And what this is it's a Cypress end-to-end test application that will run Cypress tests against the Storybook instance. So I'm going to run npx nx run shared UI end-to-end, the end-to-end task, and I want to add the watch --watch parameter onto this builder. So if I ran it without the watch, it would run the Cypress test one time and be done, and we wouldn't have a chance to stop and see what happened. So I want to do this with watch mode applied, so we can actually see the Cypress test actually running. So all of this was generated automatically for me. I didn't write any of this code. This was all generated by the schematic. The only piece that I wrote the slider component itself and the TypeScript here, but the story was generated for me, this storybook configuration was generated for me, and everything in this spec file was generated for me. Okay, so Cypress is running now. So what that builder did is it launched Storybook, and then it launched Cypress running against that Storybook. So if I click here on NX slider component, this is running against so you can see here, this is the iframe of the Storybook story. And you can see that it's just verifying that the component is present in the DOM somewhere. So let's make a real test here. I'm going to copy over one that I already wrote. And this schematic lets you jump right away into the part that's interesting for your actual application. So let me go back. So Cypress has already run this, but I'm going to have it run it again just so we can see it happen. So we've got this first one that was created for us automatically, the second one that I just wrote. So initially it's loaded like this, and then I set the value to 50 here, and then it's verifying that the cover element has the correct styling applied to it. So now this test is automated, and we can see that our changes will actually stay there, and the component will still work even if we make changes elsewhere in the application. So this is the smarter piece of the smarter and faster Angular development. And so I'm going to hand it back to Yuri to show you the faster piece.
Very cool. So let's jump back into the slides part. So yeah, as Isaac said, we want to take a look at the last piece here, which is kind of talk about scalability and speed. And as I mentioned initially, NX has kind of been designed from the ground up to work very well in monorepos. And monorepos are where you really have a lot of applications in there. And especially for large organizations, there might be hundreds of them, as well as hundreds of libraries. And obviously, first of all, you might ask, why would I need a monorepo? And so in this webinar today, we wanted to kind of focus more on how you can even use NX, even in a small single project Angular workspace. But as you go ahead and like you split them up, like you might want to have more apps in there, benefit more from the easy sharing capabilities which NX brings you. And there are a couple of other things about monorepos which you might like. But unfortunately today, like we don't really have time to go too much into that. But Jeff and Victor, which are the co-founders of Now, basically had a webinar in June where they went more into the details of like why you would want to have a monorepo, what are the challenges there you might face, and how NX can kind of help you with that. So definitely check out that talk from them. Now, in general, in a monorepo, this is the kind of graph and image which we have seen before, where you have not only Angular apps, but you might even have like React apps and backend applications and so on. And so having all those apps in there, you probably don't want to always kind of build, test, lint all of them every time, right? Because like the problem is like when you submit a merge request or a pull request to merge into master, a naive setup might just like list all of the different kind of applications and like run first the build for all of them and then the tests for all of the libraries and applications and so on, which definitely doesn't scale, right? So it doesn't scale in terms of like configuration purpose, but not even in time, because your whole pipeline might like go from like 10 minutes up to hours, which is not like working. And so NX is obviously helping you with that. And the main thing NX does here is it actually knows what you're building. And that's actually what Isaac has kind of shown you in his demo, right? Like when he showed you that dependency graph. So these pictures, which I'm showing here for like illustration purposes, are actually the dependency graph NX has behind the scenes. So it knows how the different apps and libraries relate to each other, and therefore it can also like use them and leverage them to speed up things. So for instance, if you modify something in that library, which I've marked here with that circle down there, then NX can simply like walk up the dependency graph and understand that it has to also run like testing and linting and building for the libraries above it, up to the very top where the applications reside. And it can really like cut out the entire other half of the tree, which in this case, for instance, involves like the Nest.js and the Node.js backend and a couple of libraries there. And as you can see, like it depends on the scenario or the amount of libraries which you touched basically, but it can really, really make a difference in terms of speed on CI. And so that's one part, and we call them affected commands. And so rather than running NX build specific library or app, you run NX affected test, which will then basically go through your Git commits and verify like what did you change in that specific feature compared to what is in master right now or the branch you're specifying. And then it basically calculates the libraries and then identifies what has to be rebuilt. This is one part. And another part which we have introduced in NX version 8 is the so-called computational caching. And what that does is it's something that sits on top of the whole rest. So it even speeds up things more. So basically, explained very simply, what it does is when you run, for instance, an npm test or an NX test of a specific library, then NX takes the source code and the command that has run against that source code, and it caches the result. And so if you happen to rerun the same command again, but you didn't change the source code, which basically constitutes to that library, it doesn't have to actually rerun the test. So it doesn't have to invoke jest and so on, but it just like pulls out the cached output and it shows it to you on the screen. Or if you did a build, it even like pulls out the artifacts and places it in the dist folder. And so obviously for yourself, like as a developer, this speeds up things a lot. And this comes with every NX installation. And it gets even better if you can distribute that with your coworkers. And so for instance, that's where NX Cloud comes into play. And what NX Cloud does is actually quite simple. So what happens behind the scenes is that your local cached result is simply basically played upward into the cloud. So it's pushed upwards, it's stored centrally. And then whenever some coworkers comes in and it executes the same build, first the local cache is being used to check whether the result is already there. And if not, it's synchronized with NX Cloud. And so even your coworker doesn't have to re-execute the same commands. And this obviously brings huge benefit in terms of speed. And it gets even better if you also wire it up in the CI server, because we all know that we get a lot of time lost on actual CI runs. So especially if you are in large organizations where there are like hundreds of pull requests open at the same time is often the bigger fight, not to implement the actual feature, but to get that into master. And obviously, the faster the CI pipeline runs through, it executes all your tests, the better it is for actual developer productivity. But again, I'd like to pass it over to Isaac, which can actually show it to you. So it gets even more interesting.
There we go.
You're
okay.
muted. Okay, cool.
Yep. All right. So let's do this. Okay. So I have switched over to a different repository here. The one we did before had very few projects in it. This one also is a, oops, I will reopen my terminal. This one also is not really a production application, but at least it has enough for you to see that this dependency graph can get kind of complicated. So yeah, if you can see here that even though this is a very small application, you can get lots and lots of libraries and lots of dependencies, and you don't want to rerun all the tests every time you make any change in one part of it. You don't want to run tests for every part of it. So one of the tools you can use here is, let's say we make a change here on the home page. Change this. So I'm changing the products homepage library, and I'm just updating the title there. Now I can run nx-affected dep graph, and what that does is that adds some extra information to the dependency graph to show us which specific projects in this workspace are actually affected by the changes that you just made. So it compares what's on head with what's on master or main, and you can still show the whole dependency graph, and it highlights in red the affected ones, or you can switch back to just the affected projects here. So when you do that, you can also, there's a whole suite of affected commands. You can do nx-affected test here, and that will run the test command just on this is not running on the whole workspace. It's just running on these two projects here, which is products homepage and products. It doesn't run against products E2E because that does not have a test builder associated with it. Okay, so let's run everything. And one of the benefits of the computation cache, you can run nx-affected test again, and that just happened instantly. So this was using a local computation cache, and that you get that for free just by using nx itself. So anytime I rerun this, so if I change this again to something else, and I try to run it, this time it will actually run the tests. So it will actually take some time. But if I change it back again to a previous value, that's still in the cache, and so it still happens instantly. Now, one of the really great things about using the NX Cloud distributed caching model is that if I push this up to if I make a PR out of this, and I can show you NX examples. Here we go. So I've made a PR here with do not merge on it, and let me go to the actual code here. And I say, hey Yuri, I'd like you to check this out. There's something that's not looking quite right. Can you run the tests on this for me? And I'm going to send it over to Yuri. And because of the distributed NX Cloud cache, Yuri can download this and if everything goes right, he will also have the almost instant cache that comes from, it's not on his machine. So you see he's cloning the whole repository from scratch right now. And so it's going to take some time because we're on Zoom. But while it's doing that, we can maybe answer some questions, and then we'll show the punchline a little bit later once this is all set up. So I think I'll just start answering some of these Q&A questions while we're waiting for this. So I see, I think Saji says, can you please give an example on how to set up dependency rules with app and lib tags? So there is, and let me see if if there's an example here. Yeah, so this NX examples repository does have some examples of actual application and library tags. And so you can see in the nx.json file, if you look in the nx.json file, that's where those tags are actually set up. And I can share a link to the documentation that shows how to, that walks you through how to set up some of these tags. I'm going to put this in the chat here.
Clone.
So here, this link that I just shared shows an example of how to actually set up these tags yourself. Mm-hmm. We have a question. Is there a suggestion how the conversion to ESLint should be made? We're still in the process of doing that. Look for more blog posts on how to do that coming soon. But that's one of our primary focuses for the next month or so. Let's see. Yuri, is there a ground-up tutorial showing how to use NX from install to completed app? Something with 2 to 3 apps for using multiple libraries?
I think the best way would be probably to consult the NX playbook. We have some examples in there. There's some free course in there which walks you through some simple example which shows you a couple of use cases. And other than that, the best thing is to go directly to the NX examples application, which we are showcasing right now. Because that is our own playground to test out new beta releases of NX and basically have different apps in the same workspace. And so that's probably the best way to go and have a look.
Yeah, so I'll share a link in the chat of the, Yuri, are you ready to show?
Yeah, I kind of just cloned everything, installed everything. Now I'm going to check out your PR and looks good. So this is basically your PR. And now I run the same NX affected test on a freshly cloned repository. And so what you now see is that it runs immediately, right? So it basically barely took 4 seconds. And most of those seconds probably go because I'm sharing my screen over Zoom, which takes up some processor time. But you can also see the hint here at the very bottom. So it says NX Cloud results for true project were retrieved from NX Cloud. And so you can see even the run details up here, which is, by the way, a nice and interesting feature. Let me have a look whether I'm part of that organization. So we could even share. That kind of takes up too much time. But anyhow, definitely go and check this out. So you can see this was on a clean repository. And since I didn't have a local caching, which usually sits here in that .cache folder, now you see there's a cache result in there because we actually pulled it down from NX Cloud and directly shared it within there. Cool. So let me go back to my slides. And actually conclude this demo because we promised we have some giveaway before we then go ahead and answer some of the Q&A questions which are remaining and which keep popping up in the chat. So as a giveaway, we actually have 100 hours of NX Cloud time saved for all the people that are currently watching here. So in order to redeem that, and I will keep that screen open for a while, just go to nx.app/ promotions and enter that NG Enterprise 2020 code and your email, and then we will get an email automatically after that with the actual coupon code, which you can then go online and redeem it. Like in general, you can always just like subscribe to nxCloud and get started for free. You will get 5 hours per month for free, so they will renew every month, which is already a lot to play around with it and see like how it works. Cool. Should we go through some other applications? Some other questions? I see there is one. Is there a way to share styles between my apps and libs and reset CSS file? There's definitely a way. Like libraries in general cannot only be used for just like having code in there, but you can also even have them as kind of your container for your styles and then reference them from within your applications. I'm not sure we have an example running somewhere about like sharing styles, but I definitely have a video on our YouTube channel. And let me try to find our link to that. I'm posting that general YouTube channel.
There's also on the Narwhal Connect site. I posted a link to it as I answered the chat. There's a specific cookbook that talks about how to share Sass or CSS files across multiple applications.
Yeah, definitely go onto our YouTube channel because like we have a lot of different kind of videos there, which are kind of mini tutorials, like 5-minute videos, which show some of those things. Like for instance, I know there's one which I made a couple of months ago about sharing assets, for instance, which is kind of similar to the styles actually.
Let's look at, do you have an example of sharing a library with Angular and a Nest.js application? Yes, that's absolutely possible. I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but so obviously anything that's just JavaScript code, you can share. Or you can easily share interfaces, like TypeScript interfaces. So if you have like an API that's written in Nest.js and a client-side code in Angular, you can share what your contract is between the network calls. That's the most, and then you can also share like the types of what those objects are being passed back and forth, and like decoding and encoding kind of logic. So I don't know if you know any specific examples.
No, most of the time it boils down to what you already said. Like when you generate a new library in an X in general, like what you can do is you can not only generate just like an Angular library, which has some particular setup with it, like it generates, for instance, just already like an Angular module and exports it for you, but you can also generate plain TypeScript libraries. And so that's what you usually use when you are going cross frameworks, right? Like even if you're sharing between Angular or React application, or even also with the backend. As Isaac said, if you want to share, for instance, like TypeScript interfaces for your backend API, which might be written in Nest.js or Node, plain Node, then usually what you do is you create such a TypeScript library, which has your interface, and then you can import it on both sides. So that's what you usually do. Is there some approach for guidelines in an X for either progressive enhancement or graceful degradation? Well, not in general, not that I know of, because like in theory, like, or in general, like an X is not something that goes too much into one particular technology. For instance, like we just support Angular, right? Or we just support React. And then you can use the type of like workarounds and like features you have in those frameworks to actually work against like the runtime improvements, such as like graceful degradation and so on. The best thing for sure is like if you can go towards that Jamstack kind of setup. And I actually know we have a plugin for Scully. There is some community plugin, I think, and even for Gatsby we have a plugin going, which is kind of still in the early stages, but it has Gatsby support, so you can actually have Gatsby even inside your NX workspace. And so even there again, like you can benefit from those library sharing capabilities, because like you can have your normal Angular application, and the public facing part, which I mentioned, could be actually a Jamstack application, which just includes the libraries and then builds out basically statically generated sites. And so you can benefit from that.
I have another one here. Does lib refer to Angular libraries? Can we publish these libraries to NPM or private in-house NPM registry and then can reuse in some different app? Yes. So library can be either purely local to the workspace, or you can pass the -- publishable flag when you create the library, and then it will have some extra configuration added to it, so you can publish it directly to NPM or whatever NPM registry you have set up.
Exactly. So there's an interesting one also. Many devs working on many apps and libs simultaneously end up with many conflicts, specifically in the NX.json, Angular JSON. Yeah, we kind of know that's sometimes a pain to resolve in merge conflicts, right? The best thing which I know we have done for client is if you can set up some like ordering in those NXJs, but these are basically custom scripts which you build in your NXJ, like in your NX workspace. But if you can build in some kind of ordering of the projects which live inside NX.json or in Angular JSON, then you will run in much less conflicts because like they will kind of stay in the same place where they have been before, right? So that's one workaround, but other than that, I wouldn't know of any other better solution right now. Not sure whether you know something or some tricks there, Isaac.
No, that's what I was going to suggest. There's a question about the Advanced NX Workspaces course on nxplaybook.com. This person says they've already read the book about NX from Narwhal Connect, and they want to know if there's more information in the course. Yeah, there is some more information from the course. And the thing about the course is that it is the whole goal of the course is to save you time. So it collects together information that you can find elsewhere, but it's in a condensed and one specific place for you to find it. But nothing in there is secret. And my goal is over time to put as much in the public documentation as possible. So it's up to you to decide if the price tag is worth it for your time.
Yeah. There's also a question by Aryan. I think we kind of have answered that about the ESLint support. So right now what you see like in 10.3.0 where we have like ESLint support already for Angular applications is that it is a like initial work which we've done, but we have already planned pretty intense work on improving the ESLint rules. And so you should see like improved support over the next coming of the weeks. Like right now there's basic support for it. And so you can already kind of start with it. And it will improve like as you upgrade the next Angular, like the next NX versions. And so you definitely can already start with it right now.
So there's a question about distributing a library as an Angular element without creating an app for each element. So it depends on what you mean by distribute. So we work in very large enterprises as consultants, and so there are some places that are using Angular elements internally, and they have a library set up for each element. So they like each feature is an Angular element, and then it's imported into the application as an element. So yes, you can definitely use it within the same workspace. If you mean distribute it outside of the workspace, that I'm not sure. I guess if you're making the library publishable, there should be a way to do that. I don't know how to do that off the top of my head though.
Yeah, it probably would be kind of a custom setup. I guess like the best tool there is still Manfred Steyer's NGX Build Plus, which can help you there bundle up like reusable and shareable elements. But yeah, you would probably have to kind of customize that for yourself. Right now, out of the box, there's no schematic that pre-configures your library ready for publishing with Angular elements.
So there's a question about how should I separate service classes into libraries. So there is a link that I shared earlier. Oh, no, I didn't. I will put this in the chat. So the nx.dev documentation, I'm just going to share my screen and have you look at it. Let's see. Over here. So on nx.dev, there's this whole section here on creating libraries, and there's always a trade-off between should I make another library with this code, or should I keep it in an existing library? And so this page specifically talks about that trade-off. Should I make a new library versus should I add to an existing library? And then these pages down here talk about different types of libraries you could create and how you can group the libraries together and using tags here. So this whole section here is going to be a helpful set of documentation in terms of deciding how to structure your application, your workspace.
Yeah, there is another question, which is like, does NX support micro front ends? Yeah, definitely. I mean, like the whole micro front end story mostly boils down on how you structure your applications, how you build and deploy them, right? So it's more like a deployment issue where NX doesn't really go into those details. So NX provides the whole facilities during development, building and bundling your apps, but then not really on easing the deployment for yourself. I know that Manfred Steyer, which is a big promoter also of NX in general, and I post a link in the chat, has a blog there, and I didn't yet find the one I'm interested in, but I know that he has some blog posts up there which actually showcase an NX workspace and how you can have like different applications in there and some like infrastructural parts underneath that basically allow you to have kind of a micro front end setup. And so definitely, if you're interested in that, look into that. He even has some blog posts about the whole module federation with Webpack 5 and an NX setup for that. So you can basically play around with it, which is more still experimental, but still very interesting to play around with. So definitely check out like his blog, and he has some pretty cool articles on there. Is NX supporting Ionic projects? I know there is, like, I'm pasting in our community plugins page here in the chat as well. I know there is a plugin for Ionic React. I recall I've heard about something of an Angular related plugin as well, but I don't recall having seen that yet. So you would have to basically have a look at our community page there. So maybe there's something coming up, but out of my head, I don't know about any native support. But yeah, the plugin ecosystem basically allows you to do that. So you could actually provide one and submit it to our plugin page.
There's a question here about that there's a close correlation between libraries and Angular modules. Is there a way to have NX automatically update Angular modules by using its knowledge of library dependencies? I'm not exactly sure what you're asking for here. So the Angular schematics, when you create a component or pipe, those automatically register themselves in a module. You're right that libraries, and often there's only one module per NX library. Sometimes there's more, but usually there's just one, because they're kind of fulfilling a similar purpose at least. Modules are for grouping together components in an Angular setting, and libraries are an NX specific construct to group together any kind of code, so NX can know about it. But there's nothing that will automatically change Angular modules based on a dependency graph.
Cool. There's another question as well about like potential challenges that someone might face to deploy a project with the NX structure, basically to, for instance, Firebase. And well, if you look at the structure in general, from a deployment perspective, it is not too much different, right? Because like if you have, for instance, the simple scenario where you have one application, as we have seen in the talk, and like the different libraries underneath, then what happens if you build it, they actually bundle all together in that one application. So you would still have the same output you would have as with the normal plain Angular CLI setup. So you have your dist folder, and in there you have basically all your compiled source code. And so deployment starts from there, basically, how you actually transfer then a dist folder to the Firebase page hosting. And so that's something you have to kind of take care of, which is not something NX does for you. Yeah, that's mostly it.
All right. So the last question, we were able to get through all the questions unless people start piling in more. The best practices for NX schematics in the tools folder. Any resources that you recommend? So Matt here is talking about workspace schematics, which Yuri touched on a little bit in his slideshow. Basic workspace schematics are pretty straightforward, and there should be documentation on how to use them. Here we go. Workspace schematics. Paste this in here. So this link talks about how to create some basic workspace schematics. But you can get very complicated with workspace schematics. But most of the time, all people really want to do is they want to be able to create some files in a specific place, and then maybe modify a few other files. And so if that's all you want to do, then this guide will help you with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so
definitely.
That covers 90%.
Yeah. What I also suggest is like writing tests. Especially if they get more complex, because like if you have, for instance, like schematics which set up libraries in a particular way, or like create tags for them or things like that, and then over time, like creating just unit tests in there might be really helpful. And for like inspirations on how to write those tests, you could actually go online and since NX is open source, just like look how the actual tests are written for our own schematics, which we have in there. And so for me personally, that is always a good starting point, because like you can like use a lot of utilities there, even inside the NX workspace schematics, to basically help you write those tests. There's also a very last question, and then I think like since we're kind of over time, but it is maybe some important one, which is like whether an ng update is working within an NX workspace. It is definitely working. The only thing we kind of start recommending is to not use NX like ng upgrade, but more the NX migrate feature. Like we have a specific NX upgrade command, which is NX migrate. And the difference there is basically just that ng update updates you immediately, while NX migrate basically analyzes your workspace, gets all the migration script it has to run, then basically shows you the modified package JSON. And so you can still have a look at it, even like modify it if you need, install the upgraded versions of the various packages, and then separately run the migrations. And so the NX migrate command will actually create a migration JSON file within your workspace, which lists all the migrations that have to be run. And the important part there, or the useful part there, is especially in larger repositories, that you can rerun those migrations over time. Because as you might know, like you cannot really, in real world scenarios where lots of developers say like, stop development like for 2 days, and then let's migrate, and then let's merge everything in master, and everyone continues, right? Like there we have open PRs, which are still pending, which have not been migrated, and so on. And so that migration JSON helps those developers rerun migrations even multiple times to basically upgrade the workspace for them. And so that's the main reason why we basically have in those more multi-step upgrade paths, if you want. All right.
Awesome.
Okay, that was excellent. Thank you, both of you. And then, yeah, be sure to check out the links that these guys put in the chat. I know that they were mentioning some discounts and some great offers that way. Also, be sure to check out the ng-conf website. We do have Enterprise NG coming up in November. And what's really exciting is that not only do we have this series right here of 7 free webinars, but on the first day of Enterprise NG on November 16th, we actually have a whole set of 7 additional free workshops. And these are going to be not just hour-long workshops, but will be more in-depth, 3 to 4 hours each. And like I said, free. So, I mean, that's amazing. And there will be one on NX. We're really excited to have even Jeff Cross joining us for that. And I believe, Isaac, aren't you coming back for that one as well?
Yeah, I'll be there.
Yeah, so pretty
And
cool
Raresh.
stuff. And what?
And Raresh will also be there.
Yes, so great group of guys, very talented developers. Definitely check that out. You can go get registered at ng-conf.org. Be sure to save your seat. And yeah, we'd love to have you join us for ng-conf. It's Enterprise NG in November. So thanks to everybody, and we'll get this replay available as soon as possible. Just keep your eyes open pretty much on the ng-conf YouTube channel and also on our website. So, all right. Thanks, everybody.